All right, let's reconvene. Let's bring it back in, bring it back in. We know for many of you it's been a long time since you've seen each other. For many of us. All right. As we get kicked off with our keynoter for today, we're going to offer remarks from another one of our gold sponsors, Wipfli, and we're going to go ahead and show the Wipfli video. Have been to a Wipfli conference in Las Vegas. I know that I've seen you there. Woo! If you needed to turn to an accounting firm who understands Head Start, CSBG, weatherization, federal funding streams, who do you turn to? Wipfli. Tammy Jelinek, we're thrilled to have you with us here today. We welcome your remarks. Thanks.
Thank you. Hello, Community Action. Aw, thank you. If you ever want to be intimidated, stand up in front of all of you. So, I love that your name has action in it. How many of you in your organization have ever helped somebody find housing? Let's hear it. How many of you have ever ensured that a child has a meal? How many of you have ever impacted a family so that they can successfully break second and third generational poverty? Oh, go louder. I know you've done way more than this. I am Tammy Jelinek, and I thank you all very much because as a child, I was homeless. I was food insecure. All I knew is that I wasn't always sure where the next meal was. We moved around a lot. And if it weren't for services like you providing in the community, I wouldn't be able to take care of my family today. And so with all of my heart, I thank you so much for what you do. Give yourselves a round of applause. I've been at Wipfli 25 years in 2 days. I know, right? I'm so young. It was such an early career. But I've been there for 25 years because Wipfli is allowing all of our associates, 3,000 plus of us, to do what we're passionate about. And over 200 of us work with community actions in a varied opportunity. We've been doing more audits for community actions than any other firm in the country. We do regulatory training. We try to make those regulations as palatable as possible for you. And more than anything, we just want to help you so that you can go out and help your communities. So as a young child who's now an adult that was so fortunate to have you in her life as the services that you could provide, I want to thank you all so much for what you do. Have fun, community action, and enjoy your conference.
Thank you so much. Before I introduce our keynote speaker, I just wanted to let you know that this session will have a question and answer after he concludes his remarks. So the staff will be around the room with microphones, so please be prepared with questions. It is my distinct honor and privilege to introduce Rashad Robinson. Rashad Robinson is President of Color of Change, a racial justice organization with more than 7 million members who demonstrate the power of Black communities every single day. Color of Change uses innovative strategies to bring about lasting change in systems and sectors that affect Black people's lives every day. His work has been cited in numerous publications as well as media, which includes the New York Times, the Washington Post, USA Today. He also frequently appears on NPR, MSNBC, and BET. Please join me in welcoming to the stage Rashad Robinson.
Thank you. Thank you. How's everyone doing today? It is such an honor to be with you all. I landed this morning from a red eye from Los Angeles at about 6:30 this morning, rushed to my apartment, got changed to put on the sort of suit that had been pressed, and came right here. And I feel like I have so much energy, which I don't always have after a red eye. And I feel like I have a lot of energy today because I am here in a room full of people who are every single day helping people make sense of the world around them, showing people that there is someone that cares about them, and helping people find a pathway to a better tomorrow. So I just want to start off by thanking you all for the work that you do every single day on behalf of all of the communities that you serve. And I say that as someone that is constantly looking for ways to build power, to find ways to advance people, to bring about more justice, to be able to create the type of structural changes that shape the world that we live in and create more equity and more justice for all of us. I lead an organization called Color of Change. And Color of Change is a racial justice organization that was founded in the aftermath of a flood, Hurricane Katrina. It was a flood that was caused by bad decision makers that turned into a life-altering disaster by those same bad decision makers, a flood of bad decision makers, a flood of bad decisions. Black people were literally on their roofs begging for the government to do something, and they were left to die. How many people remember those images from Hurricane Katrina? They are seared in my mind, and they are, in so many ways, what animate how I think about power, how I think about justice, how we at Color of Change think about social change, and think about what does it mean to mobilize people to change the systems around them, right? Because in moments like Katrina, so many things that we already know get illustrated, get animated, come to the forefront. The things that we already know, geographic segregation, generational poverty, the impacts of all the ways in which systems are failing us, and the ways in which structural racism undergirds each of those things. But at the heart of it, at the heart of moments like Katrina, no one was nervous about disappointing Black people. Government, corporations, media, when institutions are not nervous about disappointing your community, it doesn't matter what kind of research report you have that illustrates all the facts and figures, although that could be important. It doesn't necessarily matter what you do in the courts if you don't have the power to actually implement the type of changes that come. It doesn't necessarily matter what friends in Silicon Valley may decide to build. You can't sort of code your way out of systemic racism. You can't nonprofit executive direct your way out of systemic racism. In those moments, we need people power and we need narrative change. And part of what we think about every single day is what will it take to make those in power nervous about disappointing us. So much of the resources that go to communities every single day are a result of communities taking powerful action and forcing decision makers to be nervous. Yes, there is benevolence among some of our leaders, but we should make no mistake about what it means to have people organize in action, holding those in power accountable and forcing them to do things even when they don't want to. And so part of what we think about at Color of Change is sort of this principle of presence to power. And what do I mean by that? Far too often we mistake presence for power. Now, presence is not a bad thing. Presence is visibility. awareness, retweets, shout outs from the stage. Presence is not bad. We sometimes need to build presence. But when we mistake presence for power, we can think we've done something that we haven't actually done. We may think that the presence of a black president means that we are post-racial. We can sometimes think that the celebration of black celebrity, the album that drops that everyone talks about, means that America loves black people as much as America loves black culture. And what we know is that America can love, celebrate, and monetize black culture and hate black people at the same time. And those two things don't always have to be in conflict. And so what we try to hold up as a standard for not mistaking presence for power is a deep recognition that power is the ability to change the rules. And sometimes they are the written rules of policy, and other times they are the unwritten rules of culture. And every single day in our work, every single day in the way we show up, there are opportunities to translate presence into power, to recognize that the visibility and the awareness of the issues that we are dealing with every single day doesn't necessarily mean that people are ready to change anything about the structures that actually got us in there. That actually has to be the work to do that. And so how do we get there? Part of it is something that each and every one of us, through the work you are doing every single day, can do in terms of how we talk about the stories of inequality, how we tell the stories of injustice, how we tell and elevate the harms that we see every single day in the world. So far too often we tell stories about inequality that are unfortunate rather than unjust. And what do I mean by that? We tell stories that are unfortunate, almost like inequality is sort of like a car accident. Like it kind of just happened. And when we tell stories that are unfortunate rather than unjust, we just end up with charitable solutions to structural problems. So people will stop at sending water bottles to Flint and never work to fully clean up the pipes. Folks will say, oh, we just need an after-school program at that school, but not ask the bigger questions about the structural inequality of the funding that got us in that position in the first place. We, every single day, can tell stories that actually center the injustices, not just the unfortunate situation of the injustice happening. And we must do that if we are actually going to bring forward more people that actually want to work for structural change. Now, there's all sorts of ways in which the opponents to change set up stories to make us think that we've got to fix the people instead of fixing the systems. And so they'll tell stories that say, well, black people are less likely to get a loan from the bank, instead of saying banks are less likely to give loans to black people. And, right, that may be semantics, right, to some, but what that actually is when people say black people are less likely to get a loan from the bank, folks say, what's wrong with black people? And try to fix black people. They say, well, maybe we have to give them financial literacy programs so they can deal better with institutions which have targeted, redlined, exploited, and excluded them since their very foundation. But when we say banks are less likely to give loans to black people, we say, what is wrong with the banks? And we actually have to deal with the type of structural inequalities that exist inside of the institutions which have harmed and exploited us. But we can tell those news stories. We can put the active voice on the systems and the passive voice on the people, so we unlock the ability to actually change structures and stop trying to fix people which have been harmed, exploited, and put in harm's way. Now, I'm going to push us on another word that we sometimes use a lot across all sorts of movements. I sometimes see it in grant proposals that come from my own organization. And this is a little trickier. But we use the word vulnerable a lot. We all use the word vulnerable a lot. And, you know, vulnerability is a personal trait. Now, I might sometimes feel vulnerable if I like go on social media and I see an ex that's too happy with their life. That's something I need to work out for myself, right? That's my own stuff, right? But we talk about communities as vulnerable that have been targeted and exploited and harmed. And we talk about them as vulnerable like it only, like they did something. And that we have to fix them. Now, what would it look like if we actually thought about and treated those communities as the protagonists in their own stories? What would it look like if we actually targeted our energy at the systems that harmed us? Now, it doesn't mean that communities don't need services. It doesn't mean that we're not fighting for the type of investments in communities to uplift them. What it means is that we actually put our finger on where the problem started so that we can make sure that we are working upstream to actually fix it. When I was a much younger activist coming up and doing youth organizing, I had the privilege of spending some time with the late Julian Bond, who was the chairman of the NAACP and a leader of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. And Chairman Bond told us this story, that there are two folks sitting at a lake and they're fishing. And they're having a conversation about life and all these things. And one of them sees a baby coming down the stream. And he jumps in to get the baby. And then the other person is still fishing. And then they see another baby. And he's pulling out the baby. And then he sees another baby. And he's trying to get the baby. And then he yells at his friend to jump in. And the friend jumps in. And now they're both trying to pull these babies out of the water, pulling the babies out the water. And one of the friends looks and jumps out of the water. And he's like, what are you doing? We're going to lose babies if we're not in this water. And he's like, I need to go up to the top of the hill to figure out why these babies are in the water in the first place. We must do both at the same time, because the systems that have manufactured inequality will not stop manufacturing more inequality. And if we do not figure out a way to actually go upstream more often, we will constantly be running on a treadmill that we are not designed to actually win. And so I want us to think about ourselves as narrative infrastructure. I want us to think of ourselves as the vehicles that can shape the world around us. At Color of Change, we think about all of the different vehicles. We're inside of writers' rooms. We're inside of online environments trying to change the rules of Facebook and Google. But each of you, every single day, are coming in contact with everyday people in communities. You are providing services and resources. You are dealing with those in government. You are engaging in ways where the way in which you talk about these issues, the way in which you shape the challenges, the stories that you tell when you are demanding more funding will help to sort of set forth a story that will be able to provide us not just the type of resources for your organizations, but the type of structural changes that are absolutely required in this moment. So think of yourselves as narrative infrastructure, as vehicles to tell stories and to tell the stories in ways that are not just unfortunate, but tell the stories about the injustices. And for us at Color of Change, it's something that I've been thinking about a lot. And it's something I've been thinking a lot all the time, but particularly since 2020. It's the way in which we think about racial justice. Far too often, we think about racial justice as charity. Like the thing you do so that you don't get in trouble with the black and brown people. The thing that you do because you're a good person. The thing we do because we think it's the right thing to do. And all of those things could be fair and right. But what if each of us approach racial justice not just as a charity, but as strategy? with a deep recognition that we have no more powerful force for change in this country than racial justice. Every single major moment where we have been able to advance huge changes that have helped everyone, racial justice has been at the center of that story. Just think, in 2020, when many people thought the best activism that could happen was people clapping outside of their windows or uplifting investigative journalism, it was racial justice that drove people to the streets and demanded more. It was racial justice that led to upticks in registration. It was racial justice that was part of the engagement that forced more money and resources to go to communities that were already put in harm's way. Racial justice is not charity. Racial justice is strategy, and we should be thinking about it that way. And it's not just strategy. It's also our most powerful framework to actually evaluate whether our wins are actually as meaningful as we want them to be. Overlaying, does this meet a racial justice goal, will allow us to determine whether or not the work we are trying to move really truly undoes the inequalities and the structures that have put us in harm's way in the first place. Far too often, we have wins or we move things forward and we don't have the necessary tools to evaluate whether or not we've actually been able to undo inequality, or we've just taken a step forward that can sometimes be a step backwards for other communities. Racial justice provides us that framework. And when we think about issues ranging from voting rights to health equity, to so many of the other issues facing our communities right now, racial justice will be our most powerful investment to ensuring that we actually get all the things we need and we set ourselves up to be able to win the fights on the road ahead. And so, a couple of things I want to leave us with. At Color of Change, we do a lot of work organizing and mobilizing people in local communities. And a couple of years ago, as we started to think about what were we trying to bring people around and how were we trying to bring people together, we started to try to build out a new framework for what would it look like if we brought people together, not around the issues that they were facing, not around the challenges in our communities, not around all the struggles, but around the joy. Black joy is not the absence of pain, but the presence of aspiration, the presence of connection, the presence of hope. In each of our communities, in each of our work, we have to bring people together, not just about what we are against, but what we are for. Helping people to realize that, yes, they can be the protagonist in their own story, because what is a protagonist if it is not the person in a story that has faced so many obstacles, but despite those obstacles, continues to fight to go ahead, continues to fight against those obstacles. So think about Black people and brown people and all of those folks. Think about women of every race. Think about all of the people who have faced inequity as the protagonists in their own stories, because what would a democracy be if it wasn't about, in this country, people fighting to participate against so many people not wanting them to participate? What would education systems be in this country if it did not tell the protagonist story of those who would have been killed to learn how to read, but despite that built their own schools and educations and institutions to be able to fight for a better tomorrow? When we settle our communities in the story, not just of what they are facing, but what they have overcome and what they can be, we can build more opportunity to win, and we can win more together. And so centering Black joy, centering Black progress, centering progress for all. And the thing I want to end on is that as a racial justice leader, as a Black racial justice leader, I've centered my story and my talk a lot on Black folks in a deeply unapologetic way, because that's what we do at Color of Change. But I fundamentally believe that when oppressed people win, our wins add up for everyone. When feminists win victories, it just doesn't help little girls dream better dreams, but it helps little boys dream better dreams as well. And so we don't have to have a zero-sum game about whether or not justice for one group doesn't mean justice for another. What we have to understand is that in this country and in this time, and in order to make a multiracial democracy work, we are all gonna have to fight together. We are gonna have to build together, and we are gonna have to recognize that in order to do that, we are gonna have to find the ways to build new connections like we've never built before. The forces that want to bring us back or keep things the way they are counting on us going into our individual corners and fighting for our individual pieces of the pie. But I, because I believe in joy, believe that something different is possible, and I wanna welcome us all into that possibility and welcome you all into that possibility together. Thank you all for the work you do. Looking forward to the questions, and thank you all very, very much. All right.
Hi,
Hi.
I'm a queer Jewish woman from Kansas.
All
and
right.
I just want to say your joy is my joy. But if you could talk a little bit more about how we find those, like,
Yes.
not just semantics, but strategic suggestions on
Yeah.
how, because I both want to stay in my lane.
Yep.
Because the Black experience is not my experience and I want to honor it. But I also want to say, I want to work together. How do I help build those connections organically and honorably?
I fundamentally think that the best way we actually build connections is through the work and through campaign work. And so one way that we've actually done it, and one way that I think has been most effective for us, is actually taking on the fights, starting with our opponents, our shared opponents. And we have to do a couple of things. We have to weaken the power of our opponents. And so every single day there are folks that say they are our friends and say they're on our side and are funding and supporting people who are putting us in harm's way. They're counting on us not pushing back. And so I think in every community you need an enabler strategy. A strategy that actually makes it uncomfortable for those who are enabling injustice to be able to do so without having visibility for what they're doing, without having to actually answer for it. Sometimes just the visibility around their investments, sometimes the visibility around their alliances will make them sort of think twice about how visible. Oftentimes, our opponents think that they can continue to move the way they're moving because no one's gonna call them out, because no one is going to raise attention, because they think that they've got sort of public sentiment on their side, because we might think we're being too polite. And how often have we maybe not done the thing to raise attention and regretted it maybe a year or two later, once more power was gained by those that were in harm's way? It also doesn't, in order to have a friend, as the great Wade Henderson from the Leadership Conference said, in order to have a friend, you have to be a friend. And so the thing I would also sort of say is that there are gonna be times where each of us are in the room where another community is on the chopping block. And they're gonna count on us being silent. They're gonna count on maybe that it's not our fight or it's not our engagement. They're gonna count on us believing in this idea of a limited pie. You know, I have been laughing as I've been watching some of the news of the people against student loan debt forgiveness who got all their PP loans. It's been interesting. But I also also think that if we could forgive hundreds of thousands of dollars of PPP loans, we probably could have forgiven a lot more of student debt as well. And so, as we think about our priorities, as we think about who we uplift, as we think about celebrating victories but continue to push for more, I think the first thing is that we have to constantly be aligned around who is standing in the way and being able to hold them accountable. The next thing I think that we have to do, once again, is tell stories that center injustice, not as unfortunate, but as the result of systemic choices. That inequality is manufactured through the choices that are made in our society. And being able to tell not just how it's being manufactured, but who benefits from it being manufactured, and who is upholding the current system from being able to stay in place. Being able to tell that story and make those connections. Because it's not going to be enough for everyday people for us just to say that, like, these people want to hurt you and harm you, or these people are standing in your way, but we have to tell them how and how they're benefiting. And in each of our communities, we have very clear stories of folks who are benefiting off of injustice, but yet trying to have a relationship with the people who are most harmed. And being able to tell those stories and help people understand. And then finally, as people are receiving services, as people are connecting with the resources that you are providing, telling them the story of how it happened. So it just didn't fall out of thin air, but it was a result of advocacy and fight. It was a result of choices that were being made inside of government. It was the result of people being moved to actually do things that maybe they didn't want to do. Those stories have to become more clear to people, because there is a concerted strategy to make people who need government the most believe that they actually don't need government. And that is actually a nefarious project that will put all of the work we are trying to do every single day. It doesn't mean that we don't need to make government more efficient, but the project of actually giving money to the wealthiest Americans and tax breaks to corporations, and then telling people who are most harmed and most exploited that government is their problem, is something that each and every one of us have to be in the project of fighting back against. And so I would say, So I would say those are some very clear ways, but I think, once again, that the best way to get organized and to build coalitions is to do it inside of a fight, where you are figuring out ways to work together because you have a common goal, you have a common foe, and you can build the type of muscles that are not just up in the air, but that are down on the ground.
Thank you so much for that response.
Yeah.
Over 54 years of continuous service to communities. The question is, how can we continue to stay in the race and not get discouraged from our own and others that really don't want us in the area, but they can't do anything about it because we're still there after 54 continuous years. I'm gonna tell y'all, it's Smile Community Action, Lafayette, Louisiana, St. Martin, and Iberia. I had to shout out, but let us know about that. Let us know.
Well, I feel like I could learn so much from you all in this answer, because it's hard for me to answer this, because I think that there are probably so many stories in this very room of folks who have the blueprint, of what it looks like to be able to face doubt, to face the fears of not having enough and having too many people to serve. Feeling like you are running an uphill battle. I fundamentally believe that, for me at least, activism and being able to do something about the problems that we are facing is the greatest cure to any of the discouragement. Being able to wake up each day and to be able to engage with other people who are fighting for a better tomorrow is that. And I I think that gatherings like this are probably important and energizing as well. And I know for the last couple of years, we haven't been able to gather in the ways that I think give us the type of encouragement, the type of connection, because we were absolutely doing the things we needed to do to keep safe and be healthy. But now that we are able to go back out in the world, I think we should both learn from what we experience being virtual, but know that there's nothing like human connection. There is nothing like being in a room full of people. Like when I said I got off that red eye and I was excited to come here and be with you, it wasn't just the thing that you're supposed to say when you get up on the stage, and I hope y'all can feel my energy here, is that this gets me going because you all are every single day doing the work. And so I guess when to kind of answer your question, I would say to turn to the people next to you at your tables, to spend some time making connection at this conference, to do the things to, add 1 or 2 more people to your contact list, or 10 or 15 more people to your contact list if that's the type of person you are. And all of that, I think, will be helpful in keeping us all going. Connection, community is incredibly important to being able to keep some sense of joy and some sense of hope. And so that's what I would encourage. And then there's nothing better than finding places that we can win. And so let's find the places that we can win. And let's also celebrate the places over the last couple of years where we have won, where you all have won, where you all have forced resources into communities, where you have fought back against the type of policies that were going to put people in more harm's way. You all have had wins over the last couple of years in the face of deep challenges. And I think that that's important to recognize and celebrate and tell those stories as well, because our people need to hear stories of progress, even in the face of deep pain. Not stories of progress that are not actually true, but stories of progress of how we were able to come together and win, because those stories will fuel more energy and fuel more progress. All right.
Hello. Hi, I'm Laura Ponce. I'm a Mexican-born American, and my question has to do with religion and faith, and just kind of the complexity of that system, and how, on the one hand, it really has been a vehicle to empower and uplift people, and then on the other hand, it cuts the other way. And can you talk a little bit about just kind of how do we navigate those waters of faith? Because it is important, but at the same time, it can be very, very detrimental to certain groups.
Yeah, no, I think about this a lot. I think about this, as a person who grew up in a community with folks who are very religious, who in my 20s came out, and maybe my picture moved from a gold frame to a silver frame. Literally. I think about this a lot because it's not just religion. There's all sorts of ways where we build social cohesion, social connection, which can be life-giving for some and deeply challenging and harmful and exploitative for others. And finding ways that we help people honor the sort of cultural, spiritual, religious connections to communities while also constantly fighting to make institutions better. And we've seen it. We've seen institutions move on their treatment of women, of LGBTQ folks, of people of different backgrounds holistically, and we have to continue to do more of that. Every institution has the ability to change and has the ability to be more just, and we've seen that. All of us have seen that in different ways in our own lifetime. I absolutely have seen it. I would have never, growing up, believed that I could lead a Black civil rights organization as an openly gay man. And I get to wake up every single day and all around the country lead a team of 185 staff across this country that are working to fight for change. And some of whom are deeply religious and some of whom, you know, like are not gonna see the inside of the church unless you drag them. And all of those things are sort of part of, I think, making a community more connected. I think where I fall on this is that being very clear about where we stand and what the floor is, and being able to constantly push up the ceiling and being unapologetic about being inclusive and inviting people on that road of inclusion with us and demanding more of all the people around us to be more inclusive, to be more open, to see a world where more people can be included. And I think that that has been part of the story of progress that we have seen in this country, which has only made things more safe for all of us. And so I don't think that there's a simple answer. And I think it takes organizing. I think it takes advocacy. It takes listening. It takes a lot of love. It takes our commitment to healing. And all of those things require us each to give each other a lot of grace, but to also have a real line about what we will accept and what we won't accept for ourselves and for the people around us.
Good morning. I'm over here. I too, it wasn't a red eye, but I too came from Los Angeles.
All right.
So I hope you had fun. My question is this. There are existing black and brown institutions who advocate and fight for vulnerable people, quote unquote, as their continuous mission. How should an HBCU, a historic black college university, medical school dedicated to eradicating health inequities train its future physicians of color?
Oh, that's a great question. It's a question that I think a lot about, and I think about the leadership of HBCUs, the leadership of the graduates of HBCUs in institutions around this country. And I think about some of the deep racism inside of medical institutions, the studies and the reality that we see of doctors thinking that black people don't suffer pain the same way as white people. Literally in 2022, all of the ways in which we can see the disparities in terms of who gets care and how they get care, the mortality rates for black mothers, and all of these things that are not, once again, unfortunate, but unjust. And I think one of the things I would sort of urge is the way in which we actually are uplifting the systemic choices and the manufactured inequality that's got us in this way. And so I know I might sound like a broken record by keep looping back to these couple of things, but I think it's important that, you know, I don't give you all a book of things to do, but give you guys a couple of things to do. And one of the things I'm gonna come back to is that there's a way in which we both settle ourselves in the story of how we are in this place of health inequity, and then do the work of actually challenging the systems that put us in the harm's way. And so I think it's going to be a place where HBCUs can lead, but also where HBCUs and civil rights organizations can partner to challenge institutions across the board in terms of how they are training and how they are holding accountable those in the medical industry, those in medical institutions for how they deliver. And I'm talking everything from big pharma to local clinics. Across the board, there is an opportunity for change. Over the last couple of years, I have done a number of narrative talks at medical schools, particularly trying to walk through the larger media context that oftentimes is educating and informing how doctors show up in the world. In fact, we try to think about a range of places where racism becomes a force multiplier in our lives. And so we do a lot of work in Hollywood, which is what I was out there. We are in writers' rooms of crime procedural shows, 31 crime procedural shows of the last year, those Law and Orders and CSIs, and sometimes medical shows as well, where we go in and we help to bring experts and help them sort of actually deal with the fact that oftentimes the writers are writing from experiences of what they've seen or experiences of what they think, and oftentimes doing more harm than they are service. Thinking about how we normalize injustice on TV, how we normalize inequality through the stories we tell to people broadly. So I think there's a lot of work that can be done, and I think the partnerships are clear. But I have to think if I go back to that narrative infrastructure slide of all the different places where we can be, we can influence and shape, I think that we've got to be thinking about all of the spaces where people are engaged, whether it is a Head Start, whether it's a hospital, whether it is an education institution. All of these places where people go and they come together are places for us to be able to interrogate, to challenge, and to hopefully make better.
Hello. Good afternoon. I am of my mother's people, the Klinedi, Raven Dog Salmon from the village of Alquan, the Big Dipper House, a child of the Kagwantan. My Tlingit name and Tlingit nation is Take Unyek. I am also Hispanic and Japanese. It is an honor, Rashad, this year to be here collectively with everyone and to say Gunakshish. Thank you in our language for the land acknowledgement of the original people of this land. My comment, question, or invitation to you and to all those who hear our voices today. I hear what you're saying. I feel the power of your words, and I understand the training of those who have brought you to this moment in time. With that being said, it is a powerful movement among the Native nations. There are over 500 sovereign and tribal nations, many of which are in this room, not only physically, virtually, but spiritually and ancestrally. If they could stand with me for a moment. Alaska Native, Native American, Native Hawaiian. Thank you. Sir, with over 500 sovereign nations right here on this land that we're on today, there is a movement of land acknowledgement that is said now at schools, local governments, cities, administration, systems, and into our nation's capital. This is a very powerful moment for our people. There is a moment when words are spoken where an ancestral and a historical and a future and presence of power and strength is present. So with that, Rashad, my question or comment is more of an invitation. When we are standing in tribal, city, national governments, and our land and our nations are being acknowledged at this time, the invitation is not to look that we are marked with words, that we are categorized as vulnerable, underprivileged, something less than what we are. But we invite you to stand with us as a powerful nation and the First Nations of the people, to join us as people of different hues, of different colors. When you respect the homeland that you're in and the original people who have been there, there are blessings beyond measure. There is wisdom from the people on the land. And the invitation is, in those moments, Rashad, when we are standing under a land acknowledgement, a spiritual prayer of blessing, and our brothers and sisters and our allies stand with us at that moment. It is not, we are sharing our strength with you. And those moments can be powerful to remind the people within the system who may be taking raw advantage of it that we are complete and whole, and together our voices will rise above others. Can you please speak of taking that invitation and that moment together? Again, humbly, Gunesh Chish. And thank you to the people of this land, the native people of the land on which we stand, and receive the blessing of being present. Thank you.
That was powerful and beautiful, and I would not try to follow that except to say thank you. And I accept that invitation, and thank you for offering it. Thank you.
Hi. I feel woefully unprepared to follow that as well. And I'm Terry Bearden from the Arkansas Association, and those of you who know me know I'm rarely at a loss for words, but this may be one of those times. So thank you very much for your words of wisdom and unity. I would like to actually put up a word of division that I think has great power in our society today, and ask you to speak to how we should confront and diffuse the word that is used by the media and by the power brokers in our country and the world, in fact, and that word is polarization.
Thank you for that. It's interesting. We do a lot of work challenging Silicon Valley companies. Right now, a lot of the work is about getting regulation, because self-regulated companies are unregulated companies, and our cars are not safe because of the benevolence of the auto industry. They are safe because of infrastructure and accountability and rules. So the years that we have been challenging and having direct meetings with the CEOs of Facebook and Twitter and Google and some of the biggest companies, the battles that we've had with these companies, the word polarization comes up a lot. And it does fall into this unfortunate to unjust frame, right? It is a trick, because like they say polarization like it kind of just happened. Like, oh, there's two sides of the same coin, and they're both the left and the right, and I want us not to have conversations about left and right, but have conversations about right and wrong. And the reason why we have to settle ourselves into conversations about right and wrong, because it goes back to what I said earlier about racial justice as a strategy. When racial justice is a strategy, we're not talking about left or right. We're having a conversation about morals, and we're having a conversation about justice. And if someone wants to say that, you know, one side is for racial injustice, then that's going to be their choice to say, not my choice for them. But that's going to be their choice. But I do think that we shouldn't get pulled into this conversation, because this is not about polarization. This is about one side that is far too often putting their hand on the scale of inequality and injustice. One side that is far too often putting folks in harm's way. So it's not about whether or not people are teaching critical race theory in schools. This is about whether or not the same people that didn't want girls to learn math or want evolution to be taught, or didn't want gay teachers to be able to now cancel Martin Luther King and Rosa Parks from our schools. Because that's actually what's happening around the country, and we have to call that out for what it is and be very clear. But when we fall into the frame of polarization, that there's these two sides that are just battling, we open up the space for us to make this about two sides. There's left and there's right of a lot of issues, but there's also right and wrong. And for those that are putting their hands on the scale of inequality, we should call them out for that, but we should also take on the people that are supporting them. The folks that want to be connected to polite society, but are far too often sort of aligning themselves with forces that put us in harm's way. And so, for us, that has been the work. And many times, when those voter ID laws several years ago were popping up, the ones that sometimes said you could vote with your gun license, but not your student ID. And we went to some of the corporations that were sponsoring some of the groups that were pushing them. And we got on the phone with the corporations after some letters, and so we'd send a letter, and then they would send a letter back, and then we would get on a phone, and by the final phone call, the corporation would put their senior level black person on the phone with me. And they'd be like, I voted with my grandfather, and I'm like, I voted with my grandfather. And so we would go back and forth, and they would say, well, we give a little money to the left, and we give a little money to the right. And I just don't want us to be in that political conversation. This is not left or right, this is right or wrong. And we don't have to make our dignity and our personhood and our ability to live in a society that is on our side political. Everything we do, our bodies do not have to be political forces. We can fight on moral ground. And we have to claim moral ground if we are going to win the battles that are ahead of us. This is the fight ahead, and we have to claim the moral high ground, and that is fundamentally going to be part of the work that each and every one of us do. And we have to be brave enough to do it, not just for ourselves and the institutions we lead, but for the people that we serve, because they also need to see that the inequality that they're facing, that the challenges that are coming their way are things that we are going to fight to overcome, but they are not but they did not make them. But together we have to overcome them. And so I just want to sort of invite you all into that work. You are already there and doing so much. I am so incredibly appreciative. We at Color of Change could not run and win the campaigns that we do every single day and mobilize the voices of people to fight if it wasn't for you all. And when we go to Capitol Hill and we demand more funding for the type of services that you all are providing, I know very clearly that those resources are going to people that are doing the work to make a better tomorrow. So thank you all very much. It's such an honor to be with you all. And have a beautiful, beautiful conference and enjoy my city. All right, thank you. Yeah.
Rashad Robinson!
Thank you.
Woo! Thank you, sir. Thank you so much. Thank you. Wow. Whew. That will stick with us, won't it? We're going to take that home. We're going to take a break, let you breathe, let you talk with each other, let you share a little bit of love. We're going to come back at 11:15. We're going to have David Bradley. We're going to remember Rashad's words, though. Politics, right and wrong, right? Where we stand, where we sit in this conversation. We can't wait to have David Bradley on this stage, so please take your break and come back. We'll get started at 1:15. Thank you, everybody.